I will tell you, I was a horrible husband.
Growing up in church to ask for help.
The sexual integrity issue.
By the way, I'm not that holy as everybody thinks I am.
Jesus in therapy.
You're a living testimony of that.
We're trying to medicate these wounds that we have. Noah, do you want to get better? Even if that means losing everything that you have right now.
It's a new day, and welcome to another episode of Girl Talk, Real Talk. I am your favorite host, Lillian Bettis. This is a safe space where we educate, empower, and encourage young women to unlock their full potential and calling that Christ has over their life. And not only just women, but I know men, y'all be watching too. And today I have a special guest with me, one of my favorite people in the whole entire world. I'm privileged to call him my uncle, but he is known as a worship leader, as a friend, as a husband, and just a phenomenal God-fearing man. And so with that, Theo Noé, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am privileged to have you here, and especially as the first man. And I know it's going to be a blessing to everything that all the men that watch incognito mode.
Yes, we do watch. Believe me.
But I want it to be a blessing to young women and men. And I think especially in a time like this, where there's such a high movement of women empowerment, which is one of the fundamental pillars that we do here and believe in Girl Talk, Real Talk, but not to the point where we demasculate. We need good men to teach other men to be good.
Absolutely.
And as women, and also especially as believers, where we need to be submissive to our husbands wherever he's at. Just learning how can we empower the men in our lives, and because that means that they'll empower us. So just thank you for being here. I know that your perspective.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching these since the beginning, and I'm so excited to be a part of this. So thank you for having me, and to create an outlet to share my story that I hope and pray will help women understand men a little bit more and help men come out of what they're going through and start talking about the things that they deal with that we don't feel that we can, or that we don't have a support group for that. And so I think it's very important that women kind of get to hear this side of the conversation. And we'll get into more of that as we go through, I'm sure. So
yes, we will. In the generation that we live now, I see that it's been like a slow change of men expressing their feelings, asking for help, being more vulnerable, being more sensitive, but at the same time still being a leader in their household or in their family, and just as a man in general. When it comes to things that men struggle with in their marriage or as a single, what was the pivotal point when you made a decision to better yourself? Tell me a little bit about that story.
So backtracking a little bit. So I was previously married, and I was married for 14 years and ended up getting a divorce, something that I didn't want at the time, and had to go through that really painful process of going through a divorce and coming to the realization of who I used to be and who I've become, created a need for me to make a change within myself so that I could become the person that God ultimately wanted me to be this entire time. I just didn't know how to do that. So there was many opportunities for me to try to do it myself, and I just didn't. And so God is sovereign, man is responsible. I didn't listen to the sovereignty of God and tried to just hide things or medicate certain issues that I was having, dealing with, that really were detrimental to who I was as a husband, as a worship leader, as a pastor, worship pastor, just as a person. And so it took going through that really painful process of that divorce, the separation divorce, and then going through a period of just working on myself to be able to come out of that. And in retrospect, looking back at who I was and who I am today, it's horrible that I had to go through that, but ultimately that's what saved me. And that's what brought me to where I'm at now. And being able to share my story, which I've shared it with countless people that I've been able to mentor through this process and talk about what it takes to be broken down to that point where you have to decide that you're sick and tired of being sick and tired and want to move forward and want to make that change for yourself, not for anyone else. Because if you do it for anyone else, immediately
Yeah.
resentment begins to set in because, oh, I did this for you, or I changed this because of you, whoever you that you might be in your life. It ultimately you have to do it because you want to, and there has to be that why has to be big enough for you where you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. I love that. It's an old school saying, but I love saying that because literally you have to get to a point where it's like, God, I can't do this without you. And I've tried and I've cried at the altar every week and asked you for forgiveness for the things that I've done, but it doesn't change. Okay, well, that's a great start. But then what are you doing after you leave the altar, after you leave church, after you've had this one-on-one encounter with God that says, hey, I'm showing you what you need to do. What are you going to do with that? You're now responsible over the sovereignty that God has told you, hey, I need you to fix this. If you don't fix it, it's going to cause damage.
What was the point in your marriage of 14 years that was a breaking point that caused you? What were you dealing with in secret, in by yourself? What does that look like? Because I think a lot of people deal with this, but
Mm-hmm.
just not a lot of people like to talk about it. And I think you're now in a position where you're so proud of your change and who you are as a person. You're so
Absolutely.
confident. I don't know why I'm about to cry. um, you've done the work, and you are so proud to be who you are now. And I think I'm getting emotional because I think I just admire you as a person, as my uncle, and as one of a great man in my life that has just been a mentor to me. So I would love for you to just go into a little bit about what happened and how did you become the man who you are today?
It started early on. So, as I stated, so I was previously married for 14 years. And early on, just really, I was really young. We were both very young when we got married. And um, there was just a lot of hurt that I had carried uh, with me that I never really dealt with. And that hurt manifested itself in different ways. The fear of rejection, because of my feelings of my traumas of being rejected as I felt being rejected as a child. Your childhood, those are your formative years. I know it sounds so simple now, but
Right.
it took a process of Jesus and therapy, literally two therapists and a whole lot of Jesus
Amen.
to get to this point. I had been having an emotional affair with someone and had ended it. And then I had begun a secondary affair. I was trying to anyway, and that got found out, and so that's what triggered this whole moment of having to face the consequences of my actions. And the way that manifested for me was for me personally, it wasn't like it wasn't a sexual addiction in the sense of like pornography or things of that nature, but it was the sexual integrity issue of seeking out another relationship so that I felt accepted, that I felt wanted.
Mm.
Not that I wasn't getting that from my spouse at the time. It was I didn't know how to love me and accept me and not reject myself because I was trying to cover up this wound that I just didn't know I really had. The actual day was July 22nd, 2019, and it was at midnight. That day, 7/22/19, is a very important day for me. That was the day that I decided that I am done being the person who I was. I have two best friends, and they are amazing individuals, and I love them to death. And with friends like that, I really don't need enemies. But one of them told me, like, he had a very frank conversation with me. He said, Noah, do you want to get better, even if that means losing everything that you have right now? No one had ever asked me that before. And when he asked me that, I I realized that it was now or never. Because if I didn't make a change, I don't know that I would be here. I don't know where I would be. But it took somebody asking me that. Are you tired of being who you are? And are you willing to lose everything to become a better version of yourself? I internally made that decision of I'm done being that individual that was seeking out extramarital affairs. And I'm not trying to justify it, but it was never sexual, but it was always very, um, it was very intentional. And it was me seeking validation outside of what I already had because I was missing something as a child and, or growing up as a child. And so it took me getting into therapy to try to save my marriage, um, to realize that it wasn't about the marriage. It was me that was broken, and we're all broken, but we have to be able to face that. And so I am a huge proponent of of counseling and being able to be vulnerable with somebody and help them or have them help you navigate your past so that as you start navigating that you begin to see patterns in your life that appear that, oh, this is why I responded this way to this decision. It has everything to do with your childhood traumas. And you've got to face those because you're growing up in church. A third generation apostolic Pentecostal. And so we were taught, pray and everything will be better. That's great. But ultimately you have to do the work. And so it was a very arduous process. That I didn't want to go through. I didn't want this to be my story. I
Yeah.
remember distinctly talking to one of my counselors. Her name is Megan, amazing woman of God, licensed counselor, which is very important
Who
as
knows
well.
what she's doing?
She knows what she's doing. Yeah, because she would call me out on things, and I'd get really upset with her, and she'd fire me, and I'd fire her, and she'd be like, "Look, if you don't want to be here, go." But you're paying me for my opinion, so listen to me. I know what I'm doing. But it was her saying, "No, this is your story. I'm sorry that you had to go through this and you're getting a divorce now, but this is your story and you can't conceal it. You're going to have to deal with it." And so that meant going back and doing therapy and figuring out, okay, why am I like this? Why do I respond this way? And it's so easy to say now that it was because of a feeling of rejection and not being wanted or accepted. And that's why I acted out the way that I did.
During your 14 years of marriage, you obviously must have felt some type of way. What did you think it was?
I really just thought that it was something wrong with me and I couldn't pinpoint it. I would try to fill it with things. I could never make enough money to make it, to make us feel well.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get enough invitations to sing and to lead worship and to do things that, we had a really nice apartment. We had a really nice house, nice vehicles. We went on lavish vacations and none of that filled anything. There was always this void of there's something missing and I just don't know. I don't know what it is. So I try to fill it with different things because I wanted to be accepted. So I wanted um, to kind of keep up with the Joneses and make people think that I was more than I really was because I wanted to be accepted, not understanding that I had to accept who I was as an individual and realize um, that I had to come out of that hiding and be able to identify as a child of God and that he was my father and that he loved me and even though my parents did the best that they knew how to do, we have to confront those things from our childhood that are painful so that we can move forward as adults. And I think that's what's lacking in our society now is that people try to subdue these feelings or, they focus on different things to try to cover that up. But coming home, I felt so empty because I knew something was missing. And
Mm-hmm.
I took it out on those people that were around me that were the ones that loved me the most
Right.
because my frustration. So I was angry at myself, but took it out on them. And that was really hard to come to terms with during counseling and therapy was, wow, that's why I was so angry all the time. I hated who I was. And that's a horrible thing to say, but I hated who I was. I was emotionally unhealthy and not in a good place. Like people saw what we presented, but it wasn't that at all. I was emotionally abusive. I was never physically abusive, but I would lash out in anger because I was angry at myself, and I don't even recognize who I used to be And I'm so thankful to God that he's given me a second chance
Amen.
to come out of that and now be able to tell the story. And I know that there's a stigma of like, oh, we don't talk about that, or that you used to be a bad
Right,
person.
right. Yeah.
Listen, I will tell you, I was a horrible husband. I was a horrible human being. I was not kind, and I'm ashamed of that. But because of grace and because God is so merciful, he's given me that opportunity to heal from that and come full circle that now, as Megan said, Noah, this is your testimony. And it really is. And it was during that healing process that God began to just shower me with love and surround me with people that were like just loving me back to life.
Did you neglect going to therapy, or did you were just like, no, I don't need therapy because we were never taught it
I
growing
didn't
up?
know I
Or
needed it.
yeah,
I had like I
yeah,
assumed that I kind of probably should talk to somebody. I was hot tempered. I was very quick to anger and would just lash out and say really hurtful things, just unkind. And I'd immediately feel remorse over it. In my previous marriage, when there was just this sense of walking around eggshells with me. Like, what mood am I in today? Am I gonna? Is anything gonna set me off? And it's just gonna trigger me to be angry about something and storm out of the house and go for a drive to calm down.
yeah,
It there was just so many different aspects of my behavior that I go back and think about that if I would have known to reach out to help, I didn't know that I could. I thought that no, you have to deal with this as a man and as a man of God, and as a worship pastor, like, no, you deal with this by yourself. You can't talk to anybody about this
yeah,
because they're going to think of you differently, or they're they're going to take this from you, or what are people going to say? And now at this point, I will gladly tell people, hey, yeah, you need therapy. Go talk to somebody. They will. You pay people to listen to you, and they'll help you through things. It's great. It's very important.
yeah. So the rule when you started going to therapy, was that once a week? Was that twice a week? And then throughout that time, from your next appointment, what what practically, what did it look like practically that you did day to day? What did that process look like?
After this information came out, um, the secondary affair ish that was kind of starting off. A friend of mine told me about a men's group. The gentleman that led the group was a licensed counselor as well. So I made an appointment with him, and we would meet every other week. It dealt with, hey, let's get into your past and see where you are. Because he had something called the wound, the vow, and the lie, my counselor, Paul. So he talked about the wound, your childhood wound that happens to you between your formative years. And then there's a subconscious vow that you make to yourself to never feel that wound again.
Hmm.
And then there's a lie that you tell yourself that says, okay, I'm going to do whatever is in my power to make sure that nobody ever sees or knows about that wound because I got to protect myself. It's that self-preservation. So for me, the reason I acted out and the reason that I was so adamant about seeking acceptance was because it was my rejection as a child. The vow was, I am never going to ever feel that way ever again. And the lie is, I'm going to do it at whatever cost it takes. So if that means embezzling money, if that means having an affair so that I could feel accepted, if
Hmm.
that means presenting something that I'm not to make sure that I don't feel outcast. And that cost me so much. It was such a heavy price to pay over that wound. And I know it sounds so simple right now,
Right,
but this took years of therapy to get to this point.
right.
Paul was very much my kind of triage. Like, I was right in the middle of my divorce. We were separated, didn't know if we were getting divorced, obviously ended up getting divorced. The sexual integrity aspect of that, so being able to be held accountable. So what that was is being able to come to a group and saying, hey, I'm dealing with these sorts of temptations. There's other people in that group that were, addicted to pornography, addicted to going to the strip club, and all of us had different types of medication, if you will. We're trying to medicate these wounds that we have.
Right.
And so what that does is that skews your mind. And so what we were able to talk about in that room, I mean, it wouldn't get like, hey, this is what I'm doing explicitly. It was never that. It was, hey, I'm dealing with this, or hey, somebody would, hey, man, I messed up this week and this is what happened. And, I went to the strip club, and it's like, okay, well, there's not a new opportunity. Why did you do that? What were you doing? What could you have done differently in those moments? Did you call anybody? Like, and so for me, it was, hey, I'm feeling a certain way. I need to call somebody and talk it out with them, like a sponsor, if you will.
Right,
Very
right.
much that. So that was Paul and that men's group that I was with. And then I had Megan, who really helped me with the life applications of, okay, so you've dealt with this, you have this childhood wound that you understand now. Now it's, how do you apply it to your daily life? And that was a weekly thing, meeting with her and saying, okay, so this is what we're dealing with today. Is now we're going to be working on um, kind of your family background. Where's that coming from? Where are you at? And it got to a point of, okay, you need to start to forgive yourself. And that was so hard to do because just of um, the person that I used to be. And it was really, really hard to forgive myself. And it took a lot of going through that process of, like, I felt like I needed to pay penance, like I needed um, to pay a price for the damage that I had done. Even though I'd already lost my marriage, I'd lost my position in the church that I was in that organization, lost my job. I was on staff worship pastor there.
Oh, wow.
Um, Lost a lot of friends,
Right,
people
right.
that chose sides, and hey,
Yeah.
no, we're gonna do this. A pastor that flat out told me, you're not welcome here anymore. It was difficult. It was a difficult price to pay. But ultimately, I was able to come to terms with, those people made choices based on the information and the emotions that they had in that moment. And that was no longer my responsibility. I needed to be able to move forward and not live in that past, because God had forgiven me. As simple as it is to say, God forgives you when you ask for forgiveness. And I feel that the way we were raised, it's like, oh no, it's got to cost you something. And yes, it will cost you. It's still costing me. I'm
Right.
divorced, and I've lost those relationships, those friendships, and I have to live with that, and I have to answer to God for that. But I can move forward from that. There was a moment where I was trying to bargain with God. First, I was in denial, like, no, it's not going to happen. Like, maybe I can pray enough and fast enough, and maybe she'll come back. And then I was angry at God. So I talk at God, like, you did this. And then there was like, okay, I've got to accept this. And then there's that bargaining part of it. But I remember a service that I had gone to, and I was really vulnerable in that service. And I remember vividly lifting my hands. I said, God, if I never sing ever again, just make my marriage whole again. I'll never touch a microphone ever again. And that was on a Saturday. The very next day, no one was around me. That was a prayer I said internally.
Yeah.
The very next day was Sunday. The pastor of the church that I ended up landing at approached me in tears, and he said, Noah, the Lord spoke to me, and he told me that to tell you that you are meant to worship, and that is your responsibility and your gift. And God heard your prayer, but he doesn't accept it.
Wow.
That, I understood that God heard me. And even though it wasn't going the way I wanted it to go,
Yeah.
he heard me, and he said, I've got bigger plans for you. And this isn't the end, because I have not said that it's the end. From that moment on, God just began to open so many doors for me. And that healing began to take place in such a supernatural way. But it had to do with me being able to go back to that moment on July 22nd, 2019, that said, I am done. And I got to do something to get better.
Thank you. First of all, I want people to understand that there is something so powerful when you confess and you surrender.
Yes.
full-heartedly. You could play church all day.
Oh,
You could play
absolutely.
church all you want. You
Hmm.
could dress nice. You could have all the money in the world, but not until you fully surrender full-heartedly and say, God, I want this to happen, but you know what? Let your will be done in my life, where it truly starts to start changing. That's when God says, okay, cool. You gave up. I could do my work now.
Yes.
You are a living testimony of that. We grew up apostolic
Hmm.
Pentecostal.
Yes.
We grew up in the church. It's hard for us growing up in church to ask for help or to say, hey, by the way, I'm not that holy as everybody thinks I am.
It is, and it can be because the way we were raised is it's almost a conditional love. If you,
Exactly.
then he.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's not what God is. It's God said it and it settles it, whether you believe it or not. God said it, it's done. So if he said
Yeah.
that he's going to forgive you, he forgives you. If he said he's with you, he's with you.
Amen.
And a lot of that has to do with the cultural side of it too. As Latinos, we're not, we, at least in our families, we didn't grow up with the I love yous, at least not on, my generation. Didn't hear that until much later on in life. And so there was always this stigma of, you better act right, you better do this, because if not, then there's this punishment that comes. And so that kind of, I feel that breeds a kind of an environment of secrecy. And so I think for those that don't know Christ or don't have that relationship with God, they're trying to fill a Jesus-sized hole. And so with us, we had that, but then we had a skewed view of who God was.
Talk about it.
Like God is out there to get you and catch you with your work undone, and
Mm-hmm.
and oh, you messed up. Okay, no, there's your grace. No, yeah, no, like you can't. Yeah, your salvation's gone. You are responsible, and so you have to seek out God and seek out that relationship with Him, and be able to come to Him and say, you know what, I'm God. I cannot do this without you. So please show me, help me. And so that what that means sometimes is that's being able to say, okay, I need help. And sometimes, okay, oftentimes, the church is really not the best place to find it.
Right.
There's spiritual guidance there,
Right.
which is great because I needed that spiritual guidance, and so I needed a church family to love me, even though I couldn't really share what
Right.
was happening.
Right. 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 Yeah.
They
To
they knew it,
embrace you.
but they embraced me, but I was dealing with the fallout of that on my own. It was an investment in myself, and one that I do not regret. And it was not inexpensive, but it was worth it. Church is a very great environment to be in, and you may not be able to spill everything to them, and that's okay. But at least you have
Support
that
system.
support system. And yes, a pastor is a great counsel, but there's only certain things that pastors can do. The pastor that I was under during this process, he preached a sermon one day that was very. I'd never heard a sermon like this, especially not in the organization that we're a part of. Um, he said that the pastors failed. They don't have the proper training for counseling.
Wow. I can't believe you said that.
Yeah, I was shocked.
That's actually
And he
phenomenal.
said it again. He's like, "Look,
Wow.
we can help you to a certain extent, but ultimately, if you need to go talk to a professional, by all means, go and do that." Which growing up, I would hear pastors and preachers make fun of. Oh yeah, just go to the psychologist, and all they'll tell you is you're fine, and then you profess it, and you're good, and then you pay them $100 for the hour. I remember so many pastors saying that little joke, and people would laugh.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, that was so not appropriate at the time.
Yeah.
And that was just the thing to do, because when it comes to mental health, there's always a stigma around,
Always.
and we've got to push past that. So men are starting to do that. They're starting to take their mental health into consideration, and that is so important. We're starting to kind of take that control back and say, okay, what can I do to better myself? And I don't know how many men are going into counseling and therapy to try to figure things out for themselves. I love that I'm hearing more and more about it, and so that's very encouraging. I know when I started speaking about it to anyone that would listen, there was a stigma of like, oh, really? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So are you like on meds or anything?
Right.
And what if I was? That's not the norm anymore, is to have that stigma of being able to say, hey, I need some help. That vulnerability takes a lot of courage. It takes so much courage to say, hey,
Mm.
I'm out of my element here. I need some guidance. And hopefully there are pastors out there, leaders, mentors that can say, hey, look, I can only get you to this point, but that's as far as I can go, because otherwise I'm
Yes.
doing you a disservice.
Yes.
Because even if a pastor has a degree in something, but they haven't been through the intellectual rigor of actual licensing and going through to speak to that, it it would. I know this is a dramatic, overestimation, but it'd be like asking an EMT to perform surgery. Find somebody
Right.
that's qualified to do the work that they're supposed to be doing
An experience.
and experience. It's so important, and so I was extremely fortunate to have two individuals in my life, Paul and Megan, who I will reach out to them at least once a year. Hey, I'm still here and I'm thriving and I'm doing great, and it's because of their work that they did. Because when you become an emotionally healthy individual, or at least trying to get that way, people do that with their health, they're with working out, with their skincare routine. Like, come on, this is your mental health. That's
Right.
that's
You show up.
just as
Mm-hmm.
important. And so
Yeah.
you've got to be able to get to a point where you can say, okay, you know what, I need to talk to somebody, and it'll uncover some things. I'm telling you, it's not. I don't want to say it's fun. Like, sometimes it's fun, yes, because you discover things about yourself that are really, really cool. And there's other days that are going to really upset you because,
Damn,
as
they're right.
yeah, they're, god dang it, and I'm paying you how much money just to tell me something I already knew, but I just didn't want to
Admit it.
admit it and deal with it. And so, yeah, many a times, okay, a few times, I cussed out my counselors, and they cussed me out too. And listen, I love Jesus, but okay. Anyway, let's not get into that.